Hey, so after a summer of amazing Paralympic sport, and after being denied of so much sport for so long because of COVID and lockdowns, I am going to celebrate along with RGK Paralympic sport by speaking to a number of fantastic Paralympic heroes, stars and heroes of mine. And now I'd like to introduce arguably one of the, or if not, the greatest Paralympic wheelchair basketball player of all time, Mr. Patrick Anderson. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. I'm doing fine. Yeah. How doing better now that introduction.
Well, you know what, Patrick,
Thanks,
I did that introduction especially so we could play it back to Troy Sachs.
Well, what? We're to Troy already? What'd you say?
I said I did that introduction especially so we could play it back to Troy Sachs. You know.
Oh, I think you would enjoy that very much.
Yeah, especially the bit about you being the greatest player of all time. I think.
Sure, let's clip it. Send it to him.
We got it for Troy. We got it.
We'll go back to Troy because I think if you ask me about inspiration, I might have to bring him up. Anyway, okay. We'll get back to you, Troy.
We will. So, Pat, let's first of all tell me about Tokyo and how it was for you as an experience.
Well, it was a mixed bag, to be honest with you. On the positive side, it happened. Really, like it was, there's a moment just getting there and wheeling into the gym, like, oh, this is actually going to happen, and just sort of reflecting on the long journey to get there and all the work that went into it, and just the army of volunteers are sort of the front-facing part of the games. When you're on the ground and just sort of, but it's only even pulling it off, and under those conditions, it wasn't easy for the hosts, nor for anybody. Our Paralympic Committee and Wheelchair Basketball Canada, and that would go the same, for every country that was going. Anyway, so I was just thankful for all that work that went into having it take place at all, and the fact that Japan they were still willing to play host. I know it was a bit of a, it was an easy decision and probably to make to whether to continue with it at all or whether to cancel it, but so I'm grateful that it happened. In terms of results, like we didn't have a lot to hang our hats on the last couple of years. And so we went in like sort of with realistic goals, and we felt like reaching the quarters would be tough for us, but possible. And we would be pretty disappointed with anything less. And so when we kind of, hate to say it, but not snuck in, I shouldn't say that. We hadn't played a game in 2 years. So we rolled into our first game against Spain with, a fair bit of rust, and we got smacked around pretty good. But we had moments even in that game. In the next few, we fought with, I don't need to go play by play the whole tournament. Sorry, man. It'll be a long interview.
That's all right.
But it's kind of fresh in my mind. Suddenly, we were toe to toe with Turkey and Japan, great teams, and then but then we were 0-3 and facing the abyss of like not even making quarters, and there was a lot of pressure on us in that Korea game. So I'll have to say, like, we pulled through against Korea. It was tied in the fourth quarter. It was a pretty tense moment for us as a team and a program, and pulling through that game and then beating Colombia the next day and getting into the quarters. This long way of saying was a big, I don't know, it felt good. It was a relief. We were proud of ourselves. Then all of a sudden, we were in the quarters and thinking, hey, we got a shot at this. And so I went from kind of relief to like, do we have a chance here? And for 3 quarters we did against Great Britain. And then suddenly we did. And so, and I went from relief to pretty, I don't know, disappointment. That's you put a lot of work in, and to stare at to get a sniff of the semis like that and then have the door shut like that was, I don't know, it's tough. That's probably going to hang with me for a bit. And so that part was disappointing. And, looking around, I guess as at that point kind of became a fan of the tournament, and those semifinal games and the final game were so amazing, and made me really proud to see like the game played at such a high level. But then to look up and see, there were 100 people there, and the fact that people couldn't be in the gym to witness it was a bummer too. So I guess that's all what I mean by it was sort of a mixed bag. But man, I guess on the whole, I'm still coming down off it and decompressing and everything. So I don't know if this is the most, this is an honest take, but I don't know how I'll feel in 6 months or something. But right now I do feel a little bit bitter about not bitter, but disappointed that we couldn't take
Yeah.
advantage of that opportunity, but grateful that that we got there and that we played well and we fought hard and we had some great moments.
Well, the key is, I mean, from my point of view, looking at it from the outside perspective, is, you know, Canadian program, you're going through transition, and to have someone like you there to lead and inspire that next generation, those players that are going through the transition, I think is really, really important. But moving aside from that, I think, how important do you think it was for the Tokyo Paralympics to have gone ahead, you know, after everything that they'd gone through trying to get to that stage?
Well, for the sport, I think it was huge, you know, for us to finally get on the court and to compete and to whatever happens when a tournament like that happens and everyone's sorted out from best to worst, but there's all this. So there's the competition, there's the familiar, there's like the family part of it, you know, because even though we cast cold glances at each other sometimes across the field, you know, like it definitely is a community that I think we all care about. And so for it to happen on that level, I think was a win for us as a sport. For Tokyo, for the people of Japan and Tokyo, I don't know. It's so hard to gauge, right? Like we had great interactions with the you know, volunteers, but it's hard to know if people are watching, if they're engaging with it. It's obviously much easier to tell, say, in London, where we are, you know, in a stadium with 10,000 people, and then you're out in the public and people are stopping you. I saw this, I saw that. You see kids, you know, wearing the gear. And obviously, like, you can just imagine all the conversations that are happening around not only sport, but disabled sport, around disability and all this stuff that's like the Paralympics, but the extra stuff that you get with the Paralympics. You can see it and you can hear it. In Japan, couldn't see it or hear it. I hope it was still happening on some level through the broadcast, through streaming, through media engagement, stuff like that. But it's hard to say. I don't know.
From my perspective, I mean, working on the media side, what I can say is, yeah, it's a disappointment not to have the crowds there and have that engagement, which could have really taken it to another level, because I felt it was a great games anyway. But I think Japan getting to the final of the wheelchair basketball was major, because I saw the live TV broadcasts outside the Ariake Stadium. So that went live to the whole of the country, which would have been incredible for the country to see wheelchair basketball at that level shown. And then they had various other athletes who were winning gold. You know, Shingo Kaneda won in the tennis, the gold in the final. So all of those finals and all of those athletes, Japanese athletes going out there winning medals, in some way would have had an impact on some young disabled kids and able-bodied kids all over Japan. So I think it was a really important moment that it happened.
Yeah, I hope you're right. Yeah.
I want to get into it with you and talk about, you know, some of your early days, how you got into the sport, you know, and also about your disability, how you acquired your disability as well. If you don't mind rewinding the clock back that far, because I'm sure that a lot of people would like to hear.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, I was, you know, affected by sports right from the beginning. And, you know, grew up in Canada, so it was hockey and everything else, but everything else was great too. I loved any sport I could play. And then when I was 9, I was hit by a car. So I lost my legs below the knees on both sides. I'm a bilateral, just below the knee amputee. And yeah, sports, you know, missing sports and losing my independence was definitely the toughest part of that transition. I can still play piano and do my Elton John impersonation and stuff, but but I was stuck in a hospital chair with people pushing me around town, and I didn't like that. But sort of regained my independence and got an everyday wheelchair, you know, like not a sports chair, just an everyday wheelchair, but one that was definitely not something I could push myself. So I started to get a little stronger and gain some independence. And then I was really fortunate to be introduced to wheelchair basketball just even less than a year after my accident, which was huge. You know, I know lots of people who go years without either knowing about or caring to find out about adaptive sports, wheelchair sports. And I was lucky enough to be introduced, and not only introduced to it, but introduced by some really great athletes and coaches, 2 of whom I'll mention my name, Bruce Russell and Jeff Penner. who had been at the Seoul Games. So, I mean, you talk about young kids seeing Japanese result, Shingo, the basketball team. These weren't medal performances, but those guys, played in Seoul, Korea, and started telling me stories right off the bat about playing for Team Canada. And that just, they planted a seed in my imagination right from the beginning. And, and especially Jeff, they were both influential over the years. Jeff was sort of my coach coming up over the years. And he was he was sort of the perfect junior coach. He just held these things in tension. You got to eat your vegetables. You got to work on your left hand. You got to work on your hook passes and your chest passes and your bounce passes and all this kind of stuff. But he also had this saying, for the people, which meant crowd's bored, do something for the people, do something fun. He definitely had some Magic Johnson in him, a lot of Magic Johnson in him. And he allowed me to he made me do this stuff, and he sort of challenged me to, not only allowed me, but challenged me to have fun and put on a show, and it's not necessarily something that comes naturally to me. I'm a little shy, but I also do, as I mentioned, Elton John thing. I like to sing and perform. And so he was tapping something that was there, and so he was really the biggest influence in my career early on. Got the ball rolling, and later really solid individual kind of and somewhat team skill foundation for me that other coaches built on later on.
What was it about wheelchair basketball that really clicked with you? Because watching you, playing against you, I could see you could play in pretty much any Paralympic sport you wanted, because you've got the physical ability to do pretty much anyone. But why wheelchair basketball?
Yeah, I've been intrigued by other sports over the years, and early on, it was not just basketball. I got into sledge hockey right away too, and I don't know how big that is in the UK, but certainly, for that, the sport's pretty big in Canada, and so I started playing both these sports at the same time, and I would say probably love them equally, and maybe even I loved hockey a little bit more because that's what I was trying to kind of get back to, because that's what I grew up doing. And the smell of the ice in the hockey gym, I don't know, there's just nothing that replaces that for a young Canadian kid. So, but what happened was, sledge hockey in my area anyway, had really, it was still very much a therapeutic rec type of sport. And I came along right when they were adding the blades to the sticks. And so my friends and I used to come with me, and my brother used to come and play. Of course, we got blades on the sticks, so we started raising the puck off the ice. And so we started we're doing what kids do, trying to shoot it as hard and as high as we could. And it wasn't particularly hard or high because I was, 12 years old, but that was greeted with kind of fear and trepidation from some of the parents and stuff like that, who, you're going to hurt somebody kind of thing. And I get it in hindsight. It's that was sort of the environment of that sport at that time in that place. Mm-hmm. You're going to hurt somebody by doing that. That's not very fun. Meanwhile, I'd go to wheelchair basketball practice and be flying down the court, and someone would knock me over, and I'd go do 3 somersaults, and everyone would laugh and pick me up and throw me back in, and away we'd go. And it's kind of as simple as that. I just was well, I guess sledge hockey's not for me, and basketball was. So, in a way, it's kind of too bad, because if I'd probably come along a couple of years after that, 4 or 5 years younger than me, are guys like Brad Bowden and Billy Bridges, who you might know from the basketball world. Brad was on our 2004. I think he was the first Paralympic gold medalist in winter and summer, I believe, because he won a gold in 06 in hockey in 04 with us in Athens. And same place, same organizations. He had the same experience as me, but he came along 4 or 5 years later in the sport. Sledge hockey had evolved already that much more. So I come along a few years later, maybe I would have done both. Maybe I would have stuck with hockey and not played basketball. I don't know. But, the long arms and the short legs helped to kind of cement the deal, because it's a good combo for wheelchair basketball.
It's funny how you say, people thought that wheelchair basketball was safer and less aggressive than sledge hockey. But anyone who's played wheelchair basketball will know that, at the top level, it's pretty fierce.
No, maybe I didn't tell that story very well. It was the fact that it was dangerous and fierce, and that was okay. That's what drew me to the basketball. It was people were going to fall out of their chairs and get hurt, and it was no big deal,
Okay.
And back, that was before we strapped too. So that was back when there would be an impact, and the chair would go in one direction and the body would go in a different direction.
Yeah.
Much more Those would play much better on television these days. But nowadays, as you know, because you've fallen once or twice in your career, you do like.
I think you've been responsible for that for those 4 times, Patrick. Yeah.
I might have been in the vicinity for a few of those, but yeah, no, that was the thing about basketball. Yeah, that contact and you're allowed to be physical and be aggressive and stuff like that, and it was okay. That's was more than okay. It was celebrated.
When did you start to realize you could be good? You could be something in this sport?
Well, those guys were pumping my tires from that very first weekend. So whether that was healthy or not for my ego, they're like, "Hey, kid, you got something." I mean, they were like, if you work at it. They didn't suggest that it was mine just to open my hand and receive. But I don't know. Maybe a pivotal moment was like when I was 15. I played in Canada Games, which is a really cool event in Canada. It's a multi-sport event. So you have mini Olympics for up and coming athletes in Canada, both from the Paralympic and Olympic side. And wheelchair basketball is integrated in that, and there's disabled and able-bodied athletes. But anyway, wheelchair basketball. And that was the first time that I was sort of competing with my peers, all the best guys across the country, Jamie Borisoff and Joey Johnson and these guys. And when I went out there and held my own as a 15-year-old, we didn't win or anything. We finished fourth, I think, but holding my own against those guys. And that was kind of an eye-opener for me. And that's really around the time where I thought I just became more focused on, I got to get out of high school with good grades so I can go to Illinois and go play basketball and make the national team. That's kind of when I realized that was the path that I wanted.
What was the perception from the Canadian public? How did they look at Paralympic sport or disability sport? I mean, we've gone through mass change in the UK. Before 2012, no one really gave a monkeys about our sport, to be honest. But after 2012, I think it changed massively.
Well, I don't think we've had that kind of moment. I mean, the Paralympics, I think, are singular in that kind of impact that it can have. So I don't feel like I was ever disrespected, let's put it that way. But I mean, the awareness is just something that we're always sort of working on. And it never seems kind of just maybe around the corner in some big sort of exposure that our sport and will get. But I will say we've always had this sort of distinct advantage in Canada in terms of the average person being aware of people with disabilities and what they can achieve, because we have two like really national icons, Rick Hansen and Terry Fox. I don't know if you know either of those names.
Terry Fox, he ran from one end of Canada to the other, didn't he?
Well, tragically, he didn't make it because his cancer returned. He's a young guy. Yeah, he was back in the early 80s, single amputee, decided I'm going to run across the country, and started with him and his buddy in a van. And by the time he got to Toronto, which is like a third of the way, it was a big deal. And so it's huge. He raised millions of dollars, but then tragically his cancer came back about 2/3 of the way through, and he passed away about a year later, I think. And every year in school, in school growing up, we did the Terry Fox run. And so we're aware of this amputee who had just these balls of steel just to like a guy that was just tough as iron and with a huge compassionate heart. Like there's videos of him just getting very emotional on the mic because of how much he believed in what he was doing. And so there's Terry Fox, and then Rick Hansen a few years later wheeled around the world to raise money for spinal cord research. And by the time he got back to Canada and made his final push, it was sort of a big deal too. So, and I remember about a year before my accident, I remember standing in the snow with all the other school kids in town, waiting for Rick Hansen to wheel by, dead of winter. And so we're standing out there like shivering or whatever. And then we see like the car come around, and then we see this guy in this racing chair, this 1988 racing chair, whatever that looked like. It's probably a four-wheeler, but
yeah, it was four-wheeler, giant tires on the front.
Yeah, and he comes pushing his wheelchair through the snow, and off he goes. And then we're like, okay, we'll walk back to class now. And then a year later, so this is kind of good because like a year later, my accident happened, and about a month after that, phone rings. It's Rick Hansen. Yeah, I heard there's a kid who just had an accident. I just wanted to chat with him. And he picked up the phone. He ended up sending me his book and an autographed copy of his book, but he just chatted with me for a few minutes. He's like, hey, there's lots you can still do, man. There's adaptive sports and everything. And so and both, both those examples, like, for inspiring for me personally, but also meant that I think people across the country, these are household names, especially Terry Fox, and people in Canada have an understanding of what people with disabilities are made of. You know what I mean? So I think that respect is sort of built into being a Canadian. It's not the same thing as exposure and understanding and being like sophisticated fan of Paralympic sport or wheelchair basketball, but it's something anyway.
I mean, what did that mean to you, having someone of Rick Hansen's stature contacting you, after you had your accident?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was exciting for me, and I think it was also really exciting for my family and my parents, just because that's a big part when you overcome a disability. It's not just the kid or the person, it's their support system, and it's everybody in their orbit kind of figuring out, like, how do we help this person and where's the hope coming from? So I think that phone call was big, for not just for me, but for my whole family.
And so from 2000 to 2012, I'd say that Paralympic squad, the basketball squad that you're in, with a core of players such as Joey Johnson, Kenny Hall and Rich Peter, Dave Durapol, Jamie Borisov, all those guys, Saudi, you guys for 12 years pretty much dominated wheelchair basketball with that team. What made that team so great?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess a few things. I think we were the product of a very rich wheelchair basketball community that goes back, I went back 10, 20 years before that. All these very, both the league in Canada and sort of independent clubs and house leagues across Canada, and our sort of integration with the NWBA. So like going down to the States and our club teams going down to play them, because the US were always the best and they had the most athletes and players, and we're sitting right up there. Why not go down and play against them? And one important offshoot of that was the college programs. So like Joey went to Whitewater and played against Troy and these US guys. And then I went down to Illinois, and Jamie Borisov always says, like, you guys came back with a chip on your shoulder, and it's a good thing, in a good way. Like, you picked up a little bit of that US swagger or something. And I think that was an important ingredient as well. When I was a kid, I used to cut out pictures of the US national team. I had a little scrapbook. And I'm sorry to say, Canadian team I had in there, it was like Trooper Johnson and Dave, and cutouts of them from like tournament programs and stuff like that, because they're the US and they were the best. And so I think we grew up sort of in the shadow of the US in that sense as a national team. But across Canada, we had great players, disabled, able-bodied. It was just we ended up standing on their shoulders, so to speak. And this, couple that with, we just got lucky with, like, I think a generation of talent that kind of came along around the same time, and more or less of a generation. Jamie's 10 years older than me, so coming in, and Roy Henderson's a bit older than him. But anyway, like, the sort of group that moved through together, and reminds me a little bit like of the GB team the last few years. Just sort of these guys that are, and then you have some older guys like who they are, Terry and Gaz and those guys, but they kind of come through as a unit, and that's how it felt like we were family and brothers, and brothers who fought and hung out and partied, and we moved through the whole experience kind of together, and on and off the court we were together. You know what I mean? So, and I don't know, I have to say this because I always feel like I have to say it because he didn't get enough credit, but Joey is just, I feel like, still kind of the most underrated superstar of our sport. And it's because he was a guy who could just sort of do whatever you needed on the day. And if that meant less, then he was happy to do less, quite frankly. But whenever it was time to ratchet it up, he could do that. I know I'm speaking in vague terms, but.
No, but do you know what? I get you, because I know when we played you guys, we knew you were always going to have a big game, and we thought, well, if Pat has a big game, we could try and match that with the rest of the team. But if Pat and Joey were on fire, then you guys were pretty much unstoppable. And that's what made it really difficult, because Joey's aggressive defense and your flair in the offense as well.
Yeah, I think Joey gave us a floor that we weren't going to dip below because of his smarts, his defense, his pride. You know, he's just a very proud competitor, and he was never going to let us slip that low. You know, and I think he was really the anchor in that respect. And then of our ceiling, yeah, like if Joey was on,
Yeah.
first 5 minutes of our first gold medal game, I'm like in 2000, I'm flying around like a little chicken with my head cut off. And we got down 6-0 to the Dutch team. And then Joey was like, nope, this isn't happening. He took over the game in that first quarter and set us on a course, you know? So, yeah, Joey's special. What can I say? We had other special athletes too, really smart players. I was definitely like the physical, some of the, I added more to our physical talent than our brain trust, put it that way. Jamie Bear, Joey, some of the smartest guys I've ever seen on the court too. And I don't think that's necessarily obvious from the outside looking in, but smart guys.
So which of your Paralympic goals, which of those games do you feel was the most significant in your career?
Before I answer that, let me just say our coaching staff, not only Frog, everyone knows Mike Frogley,
yeah,
I think, within the sport, and his staff, Bozy and Jerry in particular, they had a special thing going too, and they really pulled the most out of us. And we could do a whole podcast about Frog and his influence. Looking in Tokyo, it's like, look at Steve's performance and Brian Bell and Hiro and the whole Japanese program. Yeah. Frog had a huge impact on all those guys' careers, and so he's still an influence on the game. The tippy point of the spear of the game. So the most significant, I don't know, that's tough. I mean, London felt the most, I don't know, special in some ways because we were kind of running on fumes in some ways, especially a few of the guys, and Frog was gone by that point, and I don't know, it was just tough. It was a tougher road to get there, and then I don't know, it felt good.
Just on London, because I always wondered about that, because remember 2008 Beijing, and that must have been a tough loss for you guys, in 2008, and how difficult was it for you to come back, and how satisfying was it for you to come back after losing to Australia in 2008, and then come back in 2012 and return to the top of the basketball mountain?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty tough for me personally because I retired after 2008. So I thought this is sort of the one and only time that I actually, in my mind, was like, I'm done with this. And part of that was sort of sour grapes. And, Troy, somebody who inspired like a lot of us, like in his play, but there's always like a sort of antagonistic thing with Troy. And I guess, him playing so well in that final game, I just wasn't ready in my life to like kind of, wasn't emotionally mature enough to kind of like separate maybe being in his shadow, not in his shadow, but I don't know, that just antagonistic thing from like my own journey as an athlete. So I was just kind of bitter after that. And it's like, that was part of it anyway. I also, after we won Worlds in 2006, I was kind of like, something snapped. I was like, I could go to music school. I could do whatever I want. I don't have to play wheelchair basketball anymore. And that's continued ever since. So, in the sense that like up until 2006, I was like, I play basketball. It's what I do year round. It's like the hub my life revolves around. Like, it's what I do. After that, I was like, well, I could do that and I could keep doing that, but also, and so it's been a bit of a long and winding road since then. And to come back to London, after Beijing, I retired. I met my future wife, things were going other directions. But yes, I had to go through this whole process. Like, am I coming out of retirement? Blah, blah, blah. And it took a while to make that decision. Once I made it, I was in. And then there was, I don't know, it took a while to feel like I was getting my game back, cohesion. There's a little bit of inner turmoil within the team. So yeah, it was just sort of a long path to London. But then I think, I credit our guys. We all just kind of shelved the stuff that wasn't important, focused on our goal to represent Canada and win. And so when we did, I don't know, felt extra special. And I got to look up at the crowd and see my wife in a red dress and wave at her and stuff like that. It was very, the cinematic, perfect ending. But, and I should say, like, I guess in another world, I would be like, yeah, we got to stick it to Australia, after 2008. But I just, I'm just not really wired like that. They're definitely our big rival, and I was a little bit more like, okay, I don't know. I was just, it wasn't personal at that point with the rivalry with them or anything like that.
Talking about,
maybe because Troy was retired by then.
talking about our friend Troy and also not just Troy, Joey Johnson, Jeff Glassbrenner as well.
Yeah.
I remember really seeing you guys early 2000s and thinking, wow, the way you guys as class 4s and 4.5s had changed the way that type of player played. You were more athletic. And the thing that you brought in that I think was the most significant thing in our game is tilting. And it was the way that you guys tilted, because people tilted before, but you guys tilted with a purpose and with control. And I remember hearing a story, you talking about how tilting evolved, how it came about, in some scrimmage sessions with you, Troy, and Jeff. Can you tell us a bit about that? And also explain what tilting is for people who don't know.
Yeah, tilting is just like tilting up on what looks like one wheel. It's really two wheels because it's one of your big wheels and one of your little front wheels. And so because the wheels are like this, if you tilt up on one, you can gain a little bit of vertical height, and not only vertical height, but a little bit of horizontal distance. So it's almost a way to kind of shuffle side to side, which isn't something that's easy to do in a wheelchair, right? It's a big difference between able-bodied and wheelchair basketball. So it just expands your reach, the sphere, your radius, what you can affect on the court, on both ends of the court. And, I feel like I was really lucky in this respect. I was lucky as a young player to have such great coaches. I was also lucky to come along at a time of like innovation where strapping was one big thing, like not a lot of 4 or 5 strap before that. So you're just sitting on top of your chair. So if you tried to lift up, you'd just come tumbling out of your chair if you tried to kind of throw your weight around. But as soon as you're cinched in really tight, when you jumped, your chair jumped with you, and that led to tilting, led to hopping, jumping your whole chair, like big bunny hop. And so tilting is just maybe one part of a bigger shift, which was the chair being attached to your body and then throwing your body around all kinds of different ways, and your chair following and going with you. So that changed. And then also the mid 90s or 97, I think, was when the anti-tip wheel was introduced. And that certainly impacted the game in a huge way for all classifications. I think it was a boon for everybody.
Yeah.
So I went down to Whitewater in summer 96, and those teams were, so the University of Whitewater, it was like a lab. Frog was the coach, Troy Sachs was there, Joey, all these guys. And I got to scrimmage with them for like 2 weeks as they got ready for the Atlanta games. And I got to see firsthand, like how tight Troy tilted and all the crazy things. You should have seen the things he was trying in practice. Like the stuff you ended up seeing on the court was the stuff that worked. The stuff that didn't work was even better. It was like long sliding, like gliding tilts on his front 2 casters from half court to like, could I use this in a game? And like, it was more like skateboarding. He was just trying all these tricks. And I don't know. Troy and Glass are very interesting on this point, and just in general, talking earlier about like natural talents, because like Troy's the most talented athlete I've ever seen, like the most natural athlete. And Glassburn, I didn't see him when he first started off, but I've heard the stories that he like would take a shot and it would bounce off the side wall, like the exact opposite. Like he had and to see where Glassburn ended up, very different type of player.
Yeah.
Really, if ever shot outside of 8 feet, but became an absolute expert and the best touch you could ever imagine from, in the paint. And given that he's not that tall a guy and had to tilt and do all that stuff to get a space, it's just phenomenal credit to like what you can do if you put your mind to it. And both those guys work their butts off like crazy. And now they're both like, I don't know, Troy's doing 200-kilometer hikes in the woods of Australia, and Glassburner's climbing every mountain on planet Earth. They're obviously cut from a different cloth mentally too, but it was a really exciting time to be a young 4 or 5 and seeing what these guys were making possible. And I'd say I'm lucky because I got to absorb that stuff at a very formative time in my career and start to integrate it and start to do it in my own sort of double amp way. And then when I went to Illinois, Frog gave us tons of license to experiment and explore all that stuff. We'd come in, we'd be practicing doing a drill. We'd come into the circle, and as he was talking, we'd start tilting, which meant falling over, because the only way to learn how to tilt is to be comfortable falling over. And Frog was totally fine with that as long as we were listening. So you'd see, if you walked in like, oh, it's wheelchair basketball, like you walked into practice, you'd see a circle of kids like in wheelchairs tilting up on one wheel and falling over on their face and getting back up, while a coach in the middle talked to them about whatever drill they're doing next. It might have seemed a little strange, but that was that era. And it was an important one for the game and certainly for me.
So if tilting was like one of the biggest, if not the biggest, innovation around the 2000s. What do you see as the future innovation of wheelchair basketball? Where do you think it will go in the next 10 years?
I don't know. I think we need to figure out this installation thing, like the rules, the way that they measure chair height is sort of in the way. That paradigm is in the way of someone like me developing like a bucket that's custom fit that would help me really be attached to my chair the way that I'd want, rather than like backrest, seat, strap. We're sort of stuck with. I know we have buckets. RGK makes a nice, the best that they can given the rules and the way that they're, the way they measure. But so if they ever figure out a way to find a new paradigm for how we measure, or maybe throw out measurements and just say, look, we'll have a max wheel height and sit however high you want or something like that. And then guys can go ahead and experiment and innovate. I think we're kind of stuck in that regard with the installation. And I love RGK for that. They're like, we're stuck, but they're like, well, we're not stuck. We'll try this. We'll try a modular carbon seat and do the best that we can. And that's great. But we're still held back by that. I don't know. The game's changed, right? Like how many dynamic 4.5s or, how many Troys and Glassbrenners are out there? I don't know. It's more like, it's very dynamic midpoint players. It's like enormous class 3s who are sitting 10 centimeters taller than everybody. No, 5 centimeters taller than everybody. So that's another weird rule. That's a bit of a, goes back to, lower class players sitting on soft cushions and coming down. But obviously, now players can sit on hard cushions and have proven that was never really a very strong justification for that rule. So now you just got to be able to, post, get inside or sort of post up. That seems to me, I was watching a bit of the European Junior Championships and there's like way more just like get within 10 feet of the basket or 2 meters of the basket and post up or fade away and shoot. That's very different than 20 years ago. It was all like break the defense down and get close. And, so that's not necessarily like super exciting, but mind you, that's not necessarily what you saw, say, in the gold medal game between Japan and Australia, or Japan and the US. And that's like, but you don't see a lot of 4.5s out there. There were stretches where there were no 4.5s out there. Maybe not no 4.5s, maybe one 4.5.
It's fun. It's funny. I feel like every decade becomes a decade of a certain classification. I think the 90s were the 2.5s, the 2s. And I think the early 2000s were the 4s and 4.5s. And I think now it's the 3s and 3.5s who are really dominating the game. And I don't know why that is, but it feels like every 10 years, a certain classification suddenly takes a leap and becomes the dominant classification in the game.
I think part of it is, I don't want to, well, let me say what I'm trying to say first before making disclaimers, but yeah, I think part of that has to do, if you have a midpointer that either through speed or great height can kind of allow you to play one less 4.5 out there, then you can go to the other end of the spectrum and play class 2s instead of class 1s. And class 1s can be brilliant at a lot of things, but they're never going to physically be able to keep up with you or do what Greg Warburton does or what the Brown brothers do. I know they're not brothers, but for the UK or whatever. And so suddenly you got a team, and Japan has tons of lineups like this. They're just so fast, all 1 through 5. And that we never played a team like that in their 2000s. If we had, having 2 class 1s out there, and like we might have been in some trouble. There's always that sort of, class 1 that I could get a mismatch against and then beat and then break down the defense, but you can't do that against some of these fast lineups. So you either have that through speed or like Chokai from Japan and Steve Safe with the US, or Spain's another version of that where that's through height. They're just so big, the midpointers, that like they don't need 4.5s. They don't play any 4.5s. What do they need those for?
So let's go quickly because we're getting towards the end, but classification. I'd like to get your thoughts on, the dispute or row that took on over the last couple of years between the IPC and the IWBF in terms of classification, which left a number of players in wheelchair basketball and outside of wheelchair basketball, and it left their sort of position in the sport in jeopardy. You guys lost David Eng. GB lost George Bates. Alfie Hewitt, wheelchair tennis player. His classification is is under jeopardy as well. It's been scrutinized, and it looks like he may not be playing in future games. Now, what are your thoughts on this whole classification issue?
Well, a few things. One, the timing couldn't have been worse for everyone. And I think it's a bad look for absolutely everybody that happened right before the games. Because those guys had put in the time. It should have been there. They should have been figured out a way to grandfather those guys in, whatever term is for like letting Jem be there and Dave and George. Yeah. Moving forward, I understand it's the IPC's party if they want to move into this sort of paradigm with like these 10 categories of disability are welcome to compete at the Paralympics, then I guess they have to make tough decisions like that. To me, that's not in line with like the reality of what disability is. Disability is a spectrum, from like able-bodied to very disabled. And it's not like, and so you get these, player like David Ng, we would never call him disabled. And maybe it was as a basketball community, maybe we need to own the fact that calling them minimally disabled players was maybe something that was bad choice of language and maybe gave off the impression that we were trying to pass them off as disabled, or a player that had like a knee injury from basketball and saying, oh, this person's actually disabled. Where if you think about it, just more like how we talk about things, it's like we never talked about Dave as being disabled. And, would he apply for like a job that, like as a disabled person, like I had this conversation with someone on the women's team. Like I said, do you consider yourself disabled? She's had some knee surgeries and she's like, no. Yeah. And she gave me that example. She said, I've never applied for a job that was for like a disabled person or something like that. And so maybe we did ourselves a disservice by talking about it in terms of disability. It should have been impairment is probably a better word in that sense. And so there are parts of the IPC thing. I get it. I get they're trying to create some uniformity. I'm sure it's just very difficult to police the borders of, I guess, fair competition around disability.
What would you do, Patrick? What would your advice be to the IPC and the IWBF?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sneak in my hobby horse here or whatever. I do, like a lot of athletes in Canada, like, grew up around able-bodied players that were integrated, and I feel like there's a place for them in the game. I just filled out a survey about this, so the IPC has heard my opinion, but I wonder if it might help if we just kind of left a spot open for anybody. So like 11 spots in wheelchair basketball.
A class 5.
Whatever class, you could talk about the classification system. I think that comes secondarily. I think a class 5 is fair if you consider like an able-bodied athlete would have more cross-training opportunities. I think that's really the only grounds in which you could say that they have a functional advantage over, say, me as a 4-5. They can go out and run and play able-bodied basketball, and that's good for their prep, and that's something I can't do. So maybe that they should be taxed for that. But yeah, like I just wonder, like, so if there was a spot in a roster for not only an able-bodied player, but then someone like Dave or George or someone like that who wants to take it up. And it's not like you're a great able-bodied basketball player and you snap your fingers and you're great at wheelchair basketball. It takes a lot of work. It takes years of work to get up to that level. So it's only the best and most diligent and the ones with the biggest heart for the game are going to make it that far. And that's who we want playing the game. Anyone who's willing to put in that much time and work to play at the elite level, I think deserves to be there. I think it's good for the sport. It's good for all of us. And I think there's a way to do it fairly where people still, where people with disabilities still have an opportunity to do what they do at the Paralympics. But I don't think there's necessarily ill will on any part. Like, I just think it was really bungled in it. And I do kind of fear for our autonomy, wheelchair basketball community, our ability to like kind of make decisions for our sport that we feel is best and not be too stuck with the IPC's vision of things. As much as I love the Paralympics and believe in their vision on some level, they tell us that we have to not only abide by those rules of the Paralympics, but also at our own world championships and therefore qualifying events to be in good standing with them. To me, is kind of an overreach. It's like, well, we should be able to run our world championships the way we want. So I think that has to be addressed too. And I think as athletes, someone's got to do the work of like who's accountable for how we bungled this thing as an organization, International Wheelchair Basketball Federation. They represent all of us as athletes, and the fact that I don't really know how all the dots connect suggests that I need to inform myself. I need to ask the right people, and someone has to kind of investigate, because eventually we're going to end up voting for people like to represent us at the IWPF, and that's how it's supposed to be. It's like they do a good job, they stay. If they don't, someone else has to come in to do a better job. So we need to do the work, I think, as athletes, if we actually care, not to just complain on podcasts and stuff, but I don't know, figure out what happened and hold the leaders accountable, or so we can get better leadership. On these things.
What's next for Patrick Anderson?
Don't know. Got to pick up the kids from school in an hour.
In terms of sport, in terms of, will we see you back competing at the highest level, or are you thinking of coaching? What's next?
I actually don't know. I certainly am interested in, not interested. I'm obligated and privileged to know that to have a responsibility or whatever, to give back to the game. And it might be coaching, it might be something else, but aside from playing. But I don't know if this is the moment yet to kind of dig into that. So I haven't made a decision about playing yet, but we'll see.
Does that mean we have to do a part 2 at some point to speak to you again, Patrick, and find out what happens next?
Yeah, I thought this was like part 1 of 8. That's why I dragged you into the weeds there so much. Is anyone gonna? I'm sorry. I went on so long. I apologize to anyone who's still listening. I'll try to tighten up my answers for part 2, and we'll get there. You just got to cut me off more, man.
Yeah, we'll whip you into shape. I did a podcast with Troy Sachs last week. 5 minutes. It was pure gold. 5 minutes. He was like, no, not really.
Don't stoke those. Don't stoke those flames, Ben. Put that to bed. Did you really talk to him? I gotta go listen to that. Well, now you're all caught up. I think you're all frozen, so it's probably time to go.
Hey, listen, Pat. You frozen.
Yeah, I know. Someone's pulled the plug on us. Yeah.
Hold on. Before we go, you have to do the last. I do a quick fire question section.
Hold on. Are you still frozen, man? We got to figure this part out.
Answer questions. You don't be unstable now. Come on, we're gonna get Pat.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yes.
I can. Yeah. I can now, but it's choppy.
Right. Here we go, Pat. You've got a minute, and you've got to answer these questions, right?
All right.
Ready?
Yeah.
Here we go. Paralympic gold or World Championship gold?
Paralympic.
Speed or height?
Speed.
Hit the game-winning shot or make a game-winning block shot?
Make it.
Hockey or basketball?
Oh, jeepers. Hockey?
Gretzky or Nash?
Gretzky.
Piano
and Nash.
Piano or guitar?
Piano.
Rock star or NBA star?
Rock star.
Poutine or fish and chips?
Was that fish and chips? I'm going with poutine. Although I'm not French. Obviously.
Pause. Come on. Okay. Arcade Fire or Coldplay?
Wait. Chips, because I want to get invited back to London. I'll go with Arcade Fire.
Okay.
Canadian content.
Nice. Well, last one, because it was so quick. Jordan or Kobe?
Jordan.
Ooh. Okay. Jordan or Magic?
It's like Rolex or fake Rolex. I'll take the Rolex, please.
Jordan or Magic?
Oh. Magic.
Done. We're done, Patrick.
Oh, look at that. Just only an hour in.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, one more. I'll just throw this one in there. Joey Johnson or Choi Sapp?
It's been great talking to you, Addy. I want them both. I want both those guys in my team. Nice, and a strong coach.
Patrick, it's been amazing catching up with you. Hope we can do this again,
Likewise,
my friend.
that'd be fun.
We can do this again.